Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are at the end of the paragraph on page 1288. Aleph Resh Peches. And we've entered into a new chapter within the flow and Hemshech of Ayin Beis, going back to what the Rebbe Rasha began discussing with questions back on page 1210. On the last verse in Shmuel, in the Tfilas Chana, the prayer of Chana, which we say in the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So the Haftarah is all about Chana's prayer to Hashem, to God, to give her a child, and then Shmuel is born, the prophet Shmuel, and then you have the prayer of Chana spelled out. The last verse there is Havai Yechata Meriva, that the enemies of God, Meriva, of those that fight, opponents of God, will be vanquished or eliminated, or the different translations for Yechatu. And then the second half of the verse talks about Yoram Keren Mashiche, Yitin Eiz Lamalke, to give strength to his king, Yoram Keren Mashiche, and lift the stature or the keren, the crown or the horn of his anointed one, Mashiach. So the Rebbe Rashab, after the long, we called it 77 pages of discussing the way we transform existence into becoming a keli, a container for, and actually being transformed into the Elokus. So, and the last piece being about tshuva, that even the transgressions can be turned into merits. So he now is going back to this verse. So what we've learned so far is that he asked, we have to understand, what are these meriva? Who are these opponents of his, of God's? And how could you say that they're opposing Havaya? The mi yamid kenegde, who could stand up against God? Opponents you could discuss in context of human beings who are commensurate to each other. So the Rebbe Rashab explained with the pasuk in the beginning of Iyuv, that we're talking about those that stood up against God. And what does that mean? So it's referring to the day of Rosh Hashanah, when the Mekatrugim, the prosecuting angels or the prosecutors, stand before God. Midas Hadin stands up and challenges Midas Harachim. So Rachamim is compassion. The prosecutors say you can't have compassion here. The person has sinned and transgressed. Now, why is this the case? So he explained, because when Rosh Hashanah, when the new year begins, there's the histalkus of Bina. The intellect is receding from the Midas. And when you don't have Moichin the Gadlus that are governing the emotions, so Gevurah rises and becomes dominant. One becomes more judgmental. And this is actually something we learned earlier in the Mutve Murgish Muskul, as he refers to it. Because in Bina you have the revelation of Atik. And Atik, of course, is the opposite of Gevurah. He doesn't say it here, but less smaller Bahai Atika. In Atik there's no Gevurah. In Atik everything is sweet. It's beautiful. But Rosh Hashanah, mistalkim b'chinas hameichin dezah, and they go into a type of sleep and slumber, and therefore that allows for the and the energy that's flowing into the midas is very minimal, Yanika alone. So that allows, as he quotes from the Zayad, that allows for the Gevurah to emerge and stand up. And through Tkiyah Shefer, that's what Shefer accomplishes. It awakens the sleepy, the midas that are asleep, and Yamamshir Meichin the Gadlus. But until that point, it's a Yom Adin, it's a day of judgment, because of these reasons. So the Shefer is Mamshir the Yichud Abba V'Ima Pnimi, the Yichud Pnimi of Abba V'Ima we learned earlier, which is of course an energy that comes, a new energy that enters from the higher levels. But up till that point, you have Bnei Elikim, which is Istalkus HaMeichin. So they come Bnei Elikim, Shebechin Sadim, Misyatzim, the Neged Shem Havaya. It stands up, the so-called opposes, Chesed and Rachamim, kindness and compassion. Litvoya Din Gamke, to demand judgment. And that in turn brings the Satan into the picture as well. And the Satan is far stronger than Bnei Elikim. Bnei Elikim is Gvuras, is judgments, but the Satan is Gvuras Koshes, severe judgments. And he explained why. Because a Bnei Elikim is like a child that protects the honor of the father. So the prosecutor is coming and saying, your honor has been defiled, meaning God's honor. So it's still Gvuras the Kedusha. But when a person is very medagdik, when someone is very meticulous, that can, on the lack of avodah and the hamshachas ha'eres ha'idei mitzvos, when that's lacking, so do machmes hadin shlam shemedagdik can be yeser. From that can be a derivative. Something can emerge from that, a side effect, and that is the gvuras koshes of the Satan. Like he says, ki kol ha'meisiv gereya, because it's important to have discretion, important to have some measure of discipline. But if you go too much, it says kol ha'meisiv, everyone, and when you add something, it also diminishes. So the digduk shel hem b'yeser, when you start going with a fine-tooth comb or a microscope, mistayev gvuras koshes, which is called the Satan, gematri nochashim akelo, serpent, which of course serpent always refers to a very negative entity, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And that's the meaning, Havaya Yechatu Merivov, Heim B'chinas B'nei Elikim She'ena Merivim M'Shem Havaya. Who are the Merivim? Who are the ones that are the opponents? It's talking about B'nei Elikim. They oppose Rachamim. And that's why you say Yechatu Merivim. You eliminate that. You uproot. Sheyiplu v'yishberu, that they should fall and be broken and shattered. And these judgments should be in total submission. V'nikra misukad gvuras, and this is called the sweetening of the gvuras. So that's why clearly why we say this pasuk in the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah. Now we understand why, because this is what Rosh Hashanah is about. Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment due to the istalkus, the receding of the meichin, and the judgment challenges Havaya Meriva, but then the Chata Meriva, which is the day of the Shefer, that comes and sweetens the Gvuras and stands up to the challenge and eliminates these opponents. That's what we learned till now. This is the top of page 1288. Now he's going to go further deeper into this discussion of what exactly are all these gvuras. Now, just for context, you may think that the Rebbe Rashab is digressing here and going into another subject matter. Actually, he's not. As we're going to see later, and we've seen already in the past, that the Rebbe Rashab has a very elaborate approach to explaining ideas. And remember, this is Chassidus, so you're getting the full picture. What he's really leading up to, he wants to go into the darkest of the dark. Remember, we learned in volume 2, the big question was, how do you bring pre-Tzimtzum consciousness in a post-Tzimtzum reality? Because once there's a Tzimtzum, the Tzimtzum allows for existence to be, so how do you get back to pre-Tzimtzum? And the whole point was to transform the Tzimtzum itself. Not just enough to draw energy into it, but also to transform it. But there's levels. Havayu Elikim, in the pasuk v'yadaita yem v'shaves levacha ki havayu Elikim b'shamayim emal v'oros betachas, is Havaya is revealed into the tzimtzum in Elikim, into the godliness that is subject to the tzimtzum that manifests within existence. But then comes the last two words, ein oid. That's not enough. Not just that the energy should radiate through the kelim, like we learned before about mitzvahs, but that the keli itself, the helam itself, the concealment itself, and the tzimtzum itself should be transformed. And that's the common thread here. So what the Rebbe Rashab is going into right now is to explain that process of how you actually transform gvura into chesed. Now, gvura is another name for elikim, and another name for tzimtzum and helam. And he's going to tie it all together further down this hemshech, and we have plenty to go. But that's the link and the flow of what we're learning and what we're going into right now. So he's going to go deeper now in understanding these levels of gvuras and what the gvura is, and as an opponent, and how then you transform it. So the questions he asked when we learned it back in 12:10, it also was the same obvious question. Why suddenly is he bringing a Vayichat Meriva when he's talking about Einoid and the Tzimtzum and transforming the Kalim, the Rishimu? But just like it was with Gan Eden and Elam Haba, we also didn't understand right away why the Rebbe Rashab is bringing it all. When you look back in retrospect, you see the whole picture emerging now, because he's talking about the whole transformation of the world and the Giluyim and the reward we get in Gan Eden and Elam Haba, and ultimately the transformation of this world into becoming a divine home. So when you look back, you suddenly see the picture emerging. And the same thing is going to happen now as he develops this idea. But he's now going to immerse himself into understanding this whole idea of Gvuras exactly, what it means. And a simple, if you want to put it in Chassidus applied terminology, it comes down to our challenges in this world. It's one thing when everything is going nicely and you have an experience of elikus, of godliness. But what about in our darkness, in our darkest moments, in times of tragedy, God forbid, or in times of setbacks, when you're experiencing real darkness, can you transform that into godliness? Or is it something you just have to tolerate and pass through? Or do you just draw energy into it? And the goal is going to ultimately be is transforming the very existence of the abyss itself, of the darkness itself. That's the ultimate objective. That way, it's all redeemed. In that famous letter the Rebbe writes to Ben Tzvi, President Ben Tzvi of Israel, where he explains and why he doesn't use the word Nasi, because the word Nasi is the word in Hebrew for president, the leader. So the Rebbe writes there, the famous letter where he writes that since I'm a little child, the Rebbe said, I envisioned what Mashiach is going to be like and what the ultimate Nasi is. So I can't use the word Nasi on anyone but Mashiach. And then he says what the world will be like when Mashiach comes. And then one of the statements he makes there is that we will understand that we will be able to thank God for all the affliction that he afflicted us with. In other words, to understand all the Holocaust, it doesn't say those words, all the pain and suffering, because that's ultimately the biggest question. The biggest question of all, of what's the reason for all suffering in this world? And here he's going to go into that topic. So it's not just about transforming Einoid, Kalim into Lakus, and Kalim into Oir, like he said, the Etzem Sheira Sha'er, which is Helam, but it's actually coming to help us understand that ultimately even the very darkness will be redeemed. Because ultimately we will see how it's an expression of the divine Helam Ha'atzmi, like we've been learning all the way up to the highest levels in Yechelas Ha'atzmos. So that's where this is all leading to. So there's going to be a long section now about Hamtokas HaGvuras, of Gvura being transformed and sweetened and transformed. Not just that you see the Chesed shining through Gvura, but actually the Gvura itself is going to manifest the divine, like we've been learning. Not just the Keli, is a Keli that's Mamshich the Ur, that draws energy, but the Keli itself reveals a divine dimension that's even higher than revelation, which of course, if you think about it, is most amazing thing altogether, that the darkness, the pain in this world is actually going to reveal deeper levels of the divine than the joy in this world. So that's just some background of where we're going with this whole discussion here. So now we continue. So now we'll continue learning the next paragraph on page 1288. And the pages, if you want to follow, can be found at ayinbeis.com. And now, Tchila, Yesh Levayer, we have to first explain Ikar Inyan HaGvuras Koshes.
Yesh Lehavin.
That's what I just said. What did I say?
Levayer.
Oh, Yesh Lehavin, right, correct. Now, we have to first understand Lehavin. Ikar Inyan HaGvuras Koshes. The primary Inyan, what is this, the Gvuras Koshes, these intense gvuras, severities. Ve'eich shemistayfim mebchinas gvuras de kedusha, and how they are derived from mistayif. They come, they're drawn from, or they extend from gvura, the severities of holiness, like you explained before with Bnei Elikim and the Satan. Where he said the word again, when you're medagdig b'yeser, when you become too meticulous, that can lead to kol ha-meisiv gereya, that you actually diminish. Instead of you're looking for accountability and to be able to correct the situation. But if you dig too deep and you go too much in detail, it could actually have the opposite effect. So he says we need to understand these gvuras kashis and how they are derived from the gvuras of kedusha. So he's going to go now deeper into the topic of gvuras. Now remember, this is all in the beginning of the book of Iyuv, what is the book of Iyuv, of Job? It's the classic book of suffering. Job is the quintessential sufferer, where so much of what we talk about, human suffering, is captured in that book. Where Iyuv, the good man Iyuv, ultimately is tested in the worst possible way, where everything is taken from him, and he has his dialogues with God about why is there human suffering. And that's how the pasuk begins. The Iyuv begins. That v'yisyatzev isha likim. That's what he started with. I'm sorry. V'hi ayim v'yavoy bnei likim lisyatzev alavaya. They are beginning. They challenge that this man Iyuv. Yes, he's a very fine man as long as everything is going well. And they're the ones that are makatrik, that prosecute and say, let's see. And they challenge God's compassion. And it ends up causing Iyuv tremendous suffering and grief. And the Satan comes into the picture as well. So remember that when you're talking about Iyuv in this context, and especially connected to Rosh Hashanah.
Iyuv. Iyuv, not Iyuv.
Okay.
Iyuv.
I heard what you said. I always said Iyuv. I always heard the Rebbe say Iyuv. Okay. We have our in-house linguist. So therefore, this is all vital in understanding, like I just said, the darkness of how that's transformed. So Rebbe Rasha began, we need to first understand what are these gvuras kashas, these intense severities, these heavy kashas, difficult severities, and how they are derived from and extend from gvuras de kedusha. Deina Isa bezayar, or Omar bezayar, probably Isa. It says in Zayar, Reisha de Esav, the head of Esav, is ba'atfe de Yitzchak, is in the bosom of Yitzchak. How do you translate atfe in Hebrew? It's an Aramaic word. What's the word in Hebrew?
Chek.
Chek, right. The bosom of Yitzchak. So this is a statement in the Zayar. Esav was, of course, a son of Yitzchak, but the head of Esav is the bosom of Yitzchak. What does this mean? What is the meaning of it? So he explains, the b'chinas kesed de klipa, the Esav. Now, Esav, of course, is the quintessential and the ultimate warrior, Ish Melchama, Yedid Sayed. He was a warrior, and he's called Kesed of Klippa, not just Klippa, the Kesed of Klippa, like the king, the crown of Klippa. But where is it rooted? The Chitzenius, the Gvura, the Gedusha, the Yitzchak. So that's what the Zohar is saying. The head of Esav, meaning the top of Esav, the Kesed of Esav, which is Klippa, Gvuras Kashas, is rooted in the Chitzenius of the Chitzenius, the outer dimension of Gvura Kedusha. Yitzchak is Gvura of Kedusha. Yitzchak, in contrast to Avram, who's Chesed, kindness, Yitzchak is Gvura, like it says, Shenikra Pachad Yitzchak, the fear or the trembling or the of Yitzchak. Pachad refers to Yira, reverence or Pachad or fear, Gvura. So Yitzchak is, of course, one of the Aves. So his Gvura is holy Gvura. It's with the good. Gvura could be very holy. You need to have Gvura, just like Chesed, you need Gvura. Just like you have Aves Hashem, you need Yiras Hashem. The Chesed of Avram, Pachad Yitzchak. So but from that, the chitzenis of that becomes the root of the head of Esav is coming from the outer dimension, the outer dimension of Yitzchak. That's what the Zohar says. V'nikra suspisa the dahava. It's called the waste of Zav. Dava is Zav gold. In other words, when you have a piece of gold, kesef is silver, is always chesed. Silver is chesed, and gold is gvura. But in gold itself, we know there's no such thing as pure 100% gold. There's always some sediment in it. And you actually, especially gold that comes from water or whatever, you have to remove the sediment. So in Kabbalah, there's an expression, suspisa de dava means the pselis, the waste, or the sediment of Zav. Zav referring to Gvura. Pselis, the Gvura. So he's calling it the pselis and pselis, like chetzenis, the chetzenis, not just the sediment of the sediment of Gvura, of the Gvura Salyenis, the Gedusha. So essentially, Esav, it does not come in a vacuum. First, you have Gvura of Kedusha, like Gvura of Atzilus. It's godly. Just as God has the power of Gilui, revelation through Chesed, love, God also through Gvura, like we say, L'cha Hashem Agdula v'Hagvura, God also has power, has strength, and Gvura is the discipline of the divine, the din, midas hadin, elikim. All that is a powerful divine force. Like we say, Shamish, Shemesh, U'Magen, Hashem Elikim. Just like God has the power to reveal, has the power to conceal, as we've been learning. That's in Kedusha. But from there, when you leave that be, ultimately there's an element of sediment or waste, or chesenius of cheseni, pselis of pselis, that from where it can there can derive, from there can be the root of the gvura, the gvuras koshes that are the intense and the severe gvuras. So in other words, the Satan, like you said before, these intense gvuras originate from the holy gvuras, but it's only the outer dimension. Now this is a common theme in Chassidus, that everything comes, that even a negative thing is going to come from a place of positive. But if the positive is not checked and it's not properly monitored, it can lead to all kinds of negative things. Now, of course, there's a whole ishtalshalos of how that happens. It doesn't happen overnight. It's just like different things like that. Like I mentioned the other day, I don't know if I mentioned it here, the famous example the Rebbe spoke about, that when God conceals himself, and the intention is that the child should find God, but God had concealed himself so well that the child gives up looking. So the concealment, its intention was a positive one. The gvura, the helam, was in order to elicit the ingenuity and the creativity of the child to find the father. But if you give up, what happens? The helam that initially began with a good intention could end up causing all kinds of problems. Because what? The child stops looking and goes off and has his own agenda. And suddenly the helam gives room for people to misinterpret and ultimately can lead to all kinds of terrible things. If there was no concealment in the first place, you would never have that. If there was no tzimtzum, there's no gvura, you can never have negative things. But that's not what the Eibishter wanted. He wanted to create a concealment and wanted us to be wise enough to recognize that this is part of the divine plan and see through the concealment. But if we don't understand it, the concealment can become the root of war and injustice and every genocide ever perpetrated. There could never have been a Holocaust if God's presence was completely revealed in this world, because there would be no possible to defy what God wants. But God concealed himself. And the concealment, originally so-called, in its initial state, it has a good positive goal, but it can lead to the worst. Just to give some examples, there's going to be more examples for this. Okay, so now we continue. Any questions? Let's stop for questions of anyone.
What is the susifto de dahavo? The gvur koshes, right?
That's the pselis. Yeah, the pselis of Zav leads to gvuras koshes. Zav is Gvuris Elyenis the Gdusha, gold, and Suspisa is the psela, is the waste. That, like he said, that from that will come Esav. Now, Behine. And now, Esav Omar, the pasuk says about Esav, that you will live by the sword. He will live by the sword. You will live by the sword. That, in other words, that Esav's sustenance, he will be a warrior. So literally it means tichya. Means he will live by his sustenance, and his energy will come min acheref, from the sword. Shezeu gvuris koshes. That is the level of intense severities. I think it says by David HaMelech that even though it was a sword for God, he fought for God, but it was filled with blood. Because a sword represents blood, war, battle. When you say a person lives, let's say, on bread, okay, so the bread sustains him. But if you say on someone, like here in Esav, that you will live by the sword, that means Gvuras Koshes is the source of his life, is death. Cherev means a sword that kills, that draws blood. And that's the chayas of Esav. So bottom line is, where does this originate from, this intense and very negative gvura? It comes from the positive gvura of Yitzchak, but only from the external level. Because gvura itself is not negative. It's from the pselis of pselis, the chitzenius of chitzenius, ba'atfei the Yitzchak. It didn't come from the reish of Yitzchak. It says reish, the Esav, the head of Esav, comes from the bosom of Yitzchak, not the reish, because the reish of Yitzchak is gvura of kedusha. It only comes from an external element of it. Chassidus explains why it says that Avram yotza mimenu Yishmael, that from Avram came out yotza mimenu, which is an interesting expression. It doesn't say neilad, he gave birth to Yishmael. It was a yotza mimenu, it like exited from him. And then it says by Yitzchak yotza mimenu Esav, and by Yaakov, Esav so-called exited from him. And by Yaakov it says mitosei shlema, meaning his entire family was complete. The Shvatim were all tzaddikim. So though Avram was a great tzaddik and merkava to chesed, but yotzim mimenu, because chesed alone without gvura, when you have only love without discipline, so the love of Avram was very holy and very divine. But yotzim mimenu, from that can come, the pselas can come, an exit from that can be a unikas achitzenim, that you can have a chesed of klippa of Yishmael. If you're too permissive, in simple English, you could also create a spoiled child. Same is the other extreme. When a person has gvura, so gvura its own, Yitzchak's gvura is holy, but when it's too extreme, which means the pselas, sub-pselas, from that can be the derivative of yotzim mimenu Esav. Like he just said, Esav is gvuras koshes. So Chaz v'shalom to say, God forbid to say that Yitzchak lived by the sword. He didn't live by the sword. But because of the Gvuras Kedushas, ultimately it evolved the Pselas Sub-Pselas to Esav Gvuras Koshes, that he living by the sword, which is a sword of battle, a sword of slaughter, of war, of blood. The Yuvan Zeh Lamaila, and this will be understood above. What is this Lamaila? Because right now he just spoke about it more, Esav and Yitzchak. What is this in Ruchnius? The Masha Reim will understand it Lamaila in what we see, Lamata, B'tive B'nei Yodam, we see below in the nature of people, there are different personality types. Sheyesh behem ra gomor, keritzicha ukechayes hatefes mamish. You see there are people who have a natural, aggressive nature, which is ra gomer, mamish evil. Like murder, kiritzicha, people who murder, and literally like vicious animals, predators. Teufis means those that rip apart, animals that are teirif, like a wolf. Zeiv yitrif. So, hainu, misha tivei ra lebries. Someone whose nature is being bad, cruel to others. Lebries means to people, to other people. Veloshin Yiddish, ein schlechter Mensch. In Yiddish, the expression schlechter Mensch means a bad person. Ein schlechter means one that is a bad person. Ein schlechter Mensch. A pretty strong statement here. This isn't just potential. They potentially can be cruel. Within him, you find he's actually Rabba Poil. Sheyifil Tomid Komine Ra'alebrias. He's on an ongoing basis, on a sustained basis, cruel to others. Brias means creatures, so it could really include anything. But Brias is the expression used, but to people, to creations, to creatures. Gamla Oyavov, also to his beloved, meaning Ubnei Beise. It also to his family and to those that he loved, to all those that are beloved by him, and Bnei Beise, and his family. That's how cruel he is. Hagam sha'oyevam avas nefesh, even though he loves them with a soulful love, with a full love. Avas nefesh means not just an external love. His spirit is avas nefesh, from the nefesh. He loves them with his very soul. Umisalis imohem. What does misalis mean? I guess it means that he's kind to them, that he protects them. I have to look up what the word misalis. I haven't seen that word. Rav Shlomo, you know what misalis means with hasamach?
I think it's like he's having pleasure with them.
Pleasure. Okay.
Yeah, he's having a lot of joy with them.
Okay.
I think Shlomo HaMelech is using the word misales ba'ahovim.
Okay.
The modern Hebrew translation is basically sexual intimacy.
No, that's not what he's talking here. That's modern Hebrew. This is the biblical Hebrew. So this is misalis imohem.
This is Lashon Kodesh, not Hebrew.
Right.
Okay, I understand that. I was trying to give you some relation.
No, that's not. This is not that modern Hebrew in my modern. It's always biblical. Lashon Kodesh, right? So misal, okay. So he has them, loves them with avas nefesh, with a love from his soul, from his very soul loves them. Umisalis imohem, and enjoys them. B'kol mokim, nevertheless, who meitzir umeik lehem. He causes. Find the right translation. Meitzar umeik lehem, emachde eng. He makes them uncomfortable. He makes them very stressed and very in Yiddish it's eng. Very, very, he pressures them. He basically tortures them. Meitzur umeik lehem b'chol mashe bicholte, as much as he's capable of doing. In other words, he's not
giving
minimum. Meitzur umeik b'chol mashe bicholte, or b'chol mashe yimtza eze te'ena. And everywhere where he finds some type of complaint and some type of some type of problem, something to complain about, he tortures them. You know, as a person who by nature just makes other people, even the people he loves, constantly torturing them. Doesn't necessarily mean physically, but emotionally and psychologically. That's what he does. That's this type of person. So wherever he's able to, and wherever he finds something, it's like you see people like this. Unfortunately, I witnessed it, and I deal with. What's let me? Can everybody just mute? So let me just explain. Unfortunately, you find situations where people who have a family and a wife and children and so on, they just have this nature of making people uncomfortable, and they berate, they can humiliate. Something happens that he finds that he's not exactly according to what he wants, he can be very, very abusive. So that's what he's saying here. Even though it's the people he loves and the people that are his own family. That's called a person tivay ra lebriyes. Lefisha zehu chayusei be'etzem. Why is this the case? Because this is his very essential life, his sustenance. Like we said about Esav, he lives and he thrives on this. He thrives on being an achzer, on being cruel. Masha yetzer v'yira lezulose. I'm not sure how he explains yetzer here, but upon him that he does evil and cruel. He's cruel to others, to another. The Rebbe Rashab now qualifies. V'zeh shemisale simon. And that which we say that he rejoices with them, like he mentioned before, hurak mitzat tev shalei. That's only due to the fact that he also has good in him. It doesn't mean he's 100% evil. Shu misanig bezeh. Actually, no, he's explaining it differently. That's only to the fact that he has good in him, that he has, it's for him, it's for selfish purposes. That's what he's saying.
It's good for him.
Let me explain. I'm in the middle of explaining. So because it's selfish goodness, it's for his own good. Shehu misanig bezeh. He has pleasure in rejoicing with them. It's not because he wants that goodness for them. So it's rejoicing is its own selfish rejoicing. What's good for him? I thought he was going to say that he also has some good in him, but he's now saying even worse than that. That even the good, even the rejoicing is for his own greedy and narcissistic purposes. But it's not that he desires good for them. It's actually a selfish narcissist. And this is the contrast. Ukamoy, isha tev be'etzem, she yismach v'yechaye masher heitiv luzulosei. And just as you have the opposite, a person who's fundamentally a good person, a kind person, that he rejoices, she yismach v'yechaye, and he gets life. He's enlivened and energized. When masher heitiv luzulosei, from doing kindness to another. So here with this person, Kain hu lahepech bi'isha ra be'etzem. So too is the exact opposite in the person who's fundamentally a cruel person. So there's the contrast. V'kol kach higiya hadover shel ra b'nafshei. And to this extent that he has been contaminated and he's been toxified by the ra benafshe, that evil and the cruelty and evil in his nefesh, at shegam im yichoshlu anoshim v'yazuku yikabel chayis benafshe. That when he sees people who have stumbled and are hurt v'yazuku, and they get hurt, yikabel chayis benafshe. It actually gives him chayis. He enjoys, and he lives on the fact that he sees someone else stumbling and getting hurt. Sameach u'misanig me'ed kal kol hain. He rejoices and has great pleasure. Like, for example, kol hain, like a treasure. He's like for him, it's like a gift. That's how bad it is. Not only does he do cruelty, when he sees something like that happening, he rejoices. He celebrates another person's suffering.
Like a sadist.
Yeah, like a sociopath. Gam she'ena she'ne klal, even if the person is not his enemy, even if he doesn't have any hatred to him. Rak mipnei etzem tivei hara, it's only due to his very fundamental cruel nature. Yigal v'yismach ma'ed b'takolas chavere. That he rejoices and celebrates greatly in the fall, in the failure. Takola would mean the failure, the stumbling, of chavere, of his friend, of another, even if it's not his enemy. just has a pleasure in someone else's misery or someone else's, I say takola, another word for takola would be misery, failure, takola. Yeah. And also now, this is pretty harsh, huh? In Ayin Beis, I don't remember reading such a description. This is very depressing. But we'll talk about it more. I have a few thoughts on this myself. Because you see clearly, he's not speaking about someone who acquired this nature. It looks very much like someone who's fundamentally, like you can diagnose this person as a sadist, as you put it. And the opposite is also true. And the opposite, when his colleague elevates or grows or successful, any type of wealth, like a successful venture, or covet or honor, he sees his friend is successful in something of wealth, let's say an investment or a venture or a business, or covet or honor, is getting honor, or he sees the person has success, the other has success. He sees there's a blessing of success in his actions. Whatever he puts his hands to. So what does that do? Or a success in the life of his children. He has nachas from his children. So what does this do to the person who's cruel? Yetzer, no, my mistake. I said before Yetzer, it's from the word tsar. Sheyotzar v'yira l'zulase. That he panics, he tortures and does bad to another. Not Yetzer, okay, from the word tsar. Here too. So what happens? So just like he enjoys seeing the fall and the failure and the damage to another person, he also has, it bothers him, it agitates him and aggravates him very much, and he gets depressed. His heart falls due to the success of the other, whether in all these different things. He gave an example. So he can't even stand someone else succeeding. Yiddish er fargint nit. Yeah. Yiddish, there's a word called fargint. I think in German and English has adapted the word schadenfreude, it's called. Fargintnish means you just can't tolerate, even though you don't benefit from it. Just the mere fact someone else is successful, you don't fargint. You don't want to give him even the pleasure of succeeding, which of course is a completely cruel element. Why? What do you care? You're not losing. It's not like you're being diminished. If you said that he gained and I lost, okay, so you could say, I can't deal with that. But here, there's nothing of that. The person succeeded has nothing to do with you. But a vergit nicht. V'nikret sar ayin, and this is called a person with an eye. Sar ayin means a non-forgiving eye. It's not the right word. Sar would mean more an eye that is very looks at everything very negatively.
Narrow eye.
Yeah, that's literally what it means. But what it means here, that it's like sar ayin, a person who looks at everything instead of being expansive and being giving, he looks with, it's like an evil eye. The einei ra b'shal acherim. It's like an evil eye as he looks b'shal acherim in matters of other people's issues. When he looks at others, he's always looking with a negative eye, basically. That's the expression we use. Wow, what an elaboration here. I think this is one of the only pieces in Ayin Beis that doesn't need a lot of explanation, because we're not talking about the Dargis and Shmoy HaKol Batzmuseh. Exactly. The Kol Zeh, and all this is due to Etzem Teva Hara Sheboy, to the core nature, evil nature, cruel nature within him, within this person. Now he continues. In this type of cruelty and sadism, there are a number of levels, one higher than the other. In the depths of cruelty, in the depths of achzaris, of Ra, Rahman al-Islam, God should protect. I mean, what comes to mind when you see this, when you read this, is of course the Nazis. When you see the cruelty that they perpetrated, and with a cold-bloodedness, actually enjoying. But clearly, he's talking here about others as well.
But here he's talking about a person that acts nice to the close people, and it's selfish, pure selfish. The Nazis didn't act nice.
Well, no, to their close people, they acted nice. But they didn't. Here he's talking about even to his people that are his family and the people he loves, he's also torturing them. So maybe it's not similar, because there they saw the Jews as enemies. Okay. V'yesh b'chinas ra, and then there's a level of cruelty, shudak yeser, which is dak yeser, more subtle. This is very blatant and very in your face, but there's a ra, cruelty, which is more subtle. For who? And that is kamoy sha'adam mispal b'shamay eze duvar aveda al chavere. That a person gets mispal, he gets excited or he gets stimulated when he hears a sin that another did. Shechefetz made sheyanshu ese. And he desires very much to punish him. So you'd say you hear about someone who did something really a sin. So this person gets suddenly all stimulated, and he's very much wants to become a prosecutor to punish that person. So this is calling Radak Yeser. He's not someone who's going to torture anyone, especially his beloved. But when he hears something like that, he right away is the first in line. He doesn't say those words, but I'm just explaining. He's right away there. He gets stimulated. Okay.
He wants he should get punished. Not after he, but he should get punished.
Right. Not necessarily he. That the person should get punished. But basically, he gets pleasure in that. V'nasa shliach, and now he says more. And he appoints himself, or he's willing to become a shliach, a messenger. Lasses beidin kosha ba'atzmei. So he himself is volunteering to go do punish him, din kosha, to do a severe judgment on this person, to punish him. The afal. Why is this called more subtle? Because the afal pi shemalubish davar razeh, it's the yesei seine, the esei ra. Even though this person justifies this attitude, why he's saying no? It's not because I don't like the person. He dresses it up with an excuse. Because he hates people who do evil. So even though this cruel attitude to the person that he feels should be punished and is ready to punish is dressed up in a garment that what? Is because he hates people, he despises people who did evil. Nevertheless, this cruelty that he's ready to do himself and perpetrate, yes, it's a nice excuse. He's dressing it up because we're hating bad people. Before, the person we talked about is cruel to anyone, even people he loves. Here, he's dressed is kavyachal, so to speak. Someone did evil. Someone has to prosecute. But the truth is, the evil he's doing, the cruelty that he's perpetrating is due to his nature, not because the person did evil. Due to his very nature. And that's why he gets excited by it and stimulated more than another. Why is another person not bothered? You could have two people, they both hear or see someone do something bad, And and both you could say don't like when something bad is done. Why is one of them suddenly getting stimulated and ready to do it, and the other one not? See, because it's also due to his nature. Yesem is also v'loy mitzad Yiras Shamayim, not because there's Yiras Shamayim, because suddenly he's becoming a fear of heaven. That's why he's doing it. In other words, it's not Mesiras Nefesh. It feeds into his nature. Umates atzmei, and he deceives himself. He deludes himself into thinking bizeh. And he deludes himself into thinking that no, it's not about me, it's about the other person. So he's deceiving and deluding himself into saying, no, it's not about me, it's about the evil being done. Because the proof is because there are people who are more Yereim v'Shleimim than him, more fearful or more reverent to God and more complete than him. And they're not getting excited as much as he is. They're not getting so disturbed as much as he is. Lasis einish kasha, to perpetrate a harsh punishment. Why is he doing that? It's not because of Yiras Shamayim. It's because of in his nature, there's a cruel element. So he's now, that has now emerged. So that's now another level. He called that dak yeser. That's more subtle. Now he's going to talk about another one. There's a ra, a cruelty that's even more subtle than this one. Remember, this one is subtle compared to the previous, but it's still not exactly a beautiful thing, where a person's akhzarious cruelty is there to punish others. He says there's now even a more subtle one. And what is that? A person whose mind and heart always inclined to judgment. You know, some people are malamet chus on everyone. Wherever they see a situation, even if it's negative, they find merit. Like the Rav Yisrael Barditchev. And the way it's supposed to be, have malamet chus l'kolod, dan kolod and l'kav chus. But this person, no. His mind and heart are inclined hakol din, everything to judgment. To see and to delve well in the negative of another person. And always find him guilty or responsible. And he doesn't see any good in him. And he's always judging the other person toward that he's guilty, assuming every person is guilty. So the expression, Chacham, they're wise, but their wisdom is always toward negative, toward evil. And to do good to another, lo yoda klal. They're not aware of that. They're not dedicated to that. Essentially, a person who always sees the negative in others. So this is calling even more subtle, because it's not that he's going to punish, and he's not, but still his general attitude is one of negativity. And now he's going to sum up. He says, "V'zeu b'chinas dinin koshin." This, all these levels, even the most subtle one, this is called harsh judgments. Shebeprimius yeser. What does he mean? Shebeprimius yeser? That are more internal. In other words, it's coming from an internal place. There's deeper judgments. I think what he's saying is primius here doesn't mean in a positive way. He means it's coming from the inner cruel nature of these individuals that comes from their inner personality. And that's the root for this cruelty that you actually see implemented, whether the person who's torturing others or the person who wants to punish others or the person that sees everything negative. I think that's what he means, Sheba Primius says. So first I thought he wanted to say what he said earlier, that it's rooted in Kedusha, but it's not saying that. So he says, din in koshin, Sheba Primius says.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's more in him. This is the
Yeah.
source.
Right. In other words, it's not just cosmetic. It's not just a behavioral thing. It's the previous yeser of, yeah. Or you could say this is the previous yeser of din and caution in general. Not sure the language. Okay. So now that he's given an example, he said, remember, he started the whole subject. He said, to understand the law, let's look at how it is lamata. So he gave a real example of gvuris kashis in human nature. So now he's going to go back and say, all this, the example from all of this, Yuvan, from that we'll understand, in the gvuris kashis, the severe judgments, shenikraim, shluchei hadin, the prosecutors of judgment, or the messengers. Shluchei hadin means those that are sent to implement judgment. It's like when the malach that was sent to destroy Sodom is an example of shluchei hadin.
I'm not sure. To destroy
Yeah, you may be right.
I'm not sure.
That may be wrong, because he's going to say malachim roim. These
That
are bad
was the
angels.
Malach Raphael that before came to heal Avram, and then he went to destroy Sodom.
Okay, I correct myself. Even though technically shluchei hadin would be anyone God sends to do din, but I think in this context here, you're right. It wouldn't be Sodom. Say shluchei hadin, v'hei malachim roim de klipas nega. These are called the evil or cruel angels from klipas nega. Shekol ikar chayusim huzeh, their primary chayus, their sustenance, and that's their mission. Shenishluchu lahazik la'adam, b'bona chayim mezena, rachmana litzlan. Oh boy. Their chayus comes from them being sent to cause harm to a person, b'bona chayim mezena, which is children, life, and sustenance, and parnasa, livelihood. Rachmana litzlan. The hainu, which means al derech hanal b'teva b'nei adam roim begashmis. These angels in ruchnius are similar to those to people who by nature are cruel and evil begashmis, physically that way. Kach beruchnius malachim roim. Same thing spiritually. These cruel or evil angels, shenikroim shevet anoshim. V'nigoy b'nei adam shapelim kol ra lahazik la'adam ba'enush din kosh rachman litzlan. Shevet anoshim v'nigoy b'nei adam is a posuk. It sounds like it's referring to shevet. Could be here a rod, or it could be a tribe. It could be a group. Not sure how this expression expresses it, but basically, we're talking about angels whose role is to cause evil, cause bad and damage, but enish din kasha, with a severe punishment.
I think it's talking about angels.
Yeah. V'hein nikroim.
How did he make that switch from people all of a sudden to malachim? Malachim also means that people that are representatives, or
No, he's talking about angels, spiritual.
how does he
angels.
make that? But how does he make that switch?
What he's saying is just like you have below, you have also above. You have angels that are this nature.
Okay.
V'hein nikroim ritzua la'alka. And this is what's called ritzua. Ritzua is like a whip. A ritzua is no, not a whip, a rod. A whipping rod. La'alka,
A strap.
a strap, like a belt. Yeah. In order to hurt somebody. A whip. It's actually a whip. I'm just thinking where should we go here? 1 second. There's a parenthesis now. Where's the parentheses end? Doesn't have an end. I think the parenthesis ends on the same line. I'm looking. I'd like to end on a happy note here. Anyway, I'll read a few more lines. V'hu, asher ba meras ha'adam b'maisav. This parenthesis is a little hard to understand. He's saying this is coming due to the evil that a person does. That your evil has afflicted you. This seems to contradict what he said till now. Till now, he's saying that the evil is coming from the nature of the very entity. Now he's justifying, or maybe that's why. Because before he said that even though the person may deserve to be punished, but why are you online first? Why are you so excited about it? Why are you so stimulated? So he's saying that this evil, these dinim are coming for a reason, but it's the malachim that are perpetrating are still called evil. Because why are they the ones? So they have something in them that has a negative nature. That's what I believe he's saying. And I think the parenthesis ends after that word, rasecha. V'yesh b'zeh alofim v'revav madreges. And this itself, just like we said before, the personality of a person that can be cruel. There are many levels. Also on the Ruchni Izdika level of avenging and prosecuting angels, the negative ones. There are alofim v'revav, thousands and tens of thousands of levels. V'sharshem hakloli. And the general root of all these levels, who has satan hamakatrig. It's the satan that is the prosecutor, mekatrig, the one that comes with the complaint, the one that mekatrig. Kamaymer eila omastin v'yered mekatrig. So it says about the satan. Why it's called satan? Eila omastin. He goes up, a mastin, which means he spews negativity. V'yered mekatrig, and then comes below, and mekatrig and complains or mekatrig prosecutes. Shezeh kol ikar chayusei. That's his entire sustenance. That's his primary sustenance. Kol ikar chayusei. Page 1289. Ubila deizeis ein lechayis. And if he didn't do this job, he would have no life. He would have no sustenance. He wouldn't have any purpose. That's the purpose. Kaluka shemeshachas adam. Like a leech that draws blood. That's all. Its whole life is the blood of another, like a mosquito, like a leech, like anything that lives off the blood of another. So its very sustenance is sapen blood. How do you say sapen? Drawing blood from another. Masha'elu mastin. What is the meaning? Masha'elu goes up and mastin and spews this venom. That's like the example he gave before. A person who's fundamentally evil and cruel. He despises his colleague because he did something evil. His whole magmose, his whole chayis, his whole yearning, his whole purpose is only to do evil to him. That's why he finds every type of chayv, every type of guilt. So he can that he can complain about or prosecute him about, in order to punish him. I'll already read till the end of the paragraph. So first he does that by finding all the faults in him, and then he comes down and he actually brings out and implements this Rabba Poel, this cruelty in actuality. And what is a more subtle form of this evil, like we learned? That his heart, mind and heart is inclined to judgment, to guilt, Hu gvuras v'dinim koshim el yenim yeser. These are higher level judgments, intense judgments that are higher level. And from this extends that he once you look negatively, so what did he do? Nosan Einav b'migdash, that God looked at the Beis Hamikdash v'yichrivay, and he destroyed it. Lefi sheyetzar lei mahatev, lefi sheyotzar lei mahatev shel Yisrael.
I don't think it's God.
I know. Anyway, it's probably the Sultan. That's probably what it's referring to. I have to look it up. Where he begins with a negative attitude and then he looks downward and causes it to be destroyed because sheyotzer, from the word sar, he has pain from the good that of the Jewish people. V'zeu sheyered the mishtal shel gvuras hakoshes me'elyon letachten me'plimis lechitzenius. I want to correct what I said before was not correct. The Primus Yeser, I see now from what he's saying here, he meant that first it starts in a more higher level, the Gvuris, and then it comes down in actual evil and cruelty. That's what he means here. Like what he says here, that first it starts, the Yerim Mishtas Gvuris HaKoshes Me'elitam Be'Primus Lechitzenius. First it's more internal, meaning internally there's that negative attitude, and then it comes the Chitzenius, but Avovis Madregis, in the tens of thousands of levels until it comes to an actual punishment. And all of them originate from the 11th level Keser, which is the 11th sphere. We know Yud Aleph comes from the Umazeh. Yud Aleph Kisrin de Misavusa is the toxic Kisrin Keser of Klippa, which is called the head of Esav that we said before. Now, this needs to be reviewed again. I'm going to learn it again on Sunday, but I just wanted to finish the paragraph. So, it speaks for itself. He's talking about how Gvuras can get really bad, but they all are nishtalshel from a more subtle form. They come into a more crass form. Well, you still have to understand where the Gvuras Kedusha, because he didn't bring yet Kedusha. Everything here is still in the negative. It just, the question is how coarse it is, how cruel it is. But it's all coming from more subtle levels to more extreme levels. I'm going to go over it again on Sunday. So we'll stop here by the end of the top of the paragraph. Any questions?
Isn't Satan a Kedusha? I mean, he's employed by God to do it, and who says he wants to do it, but he's doing it because he listens to God.
It says in the Gemara, Satan l'shem shemayim niskaven, that the Satan is doing it l'shem shemayim because God appointed him to do it. That's correct. But let's see. He may explain this, and maybe he won't explain it. We'll see.
I had the same question about Malachim in general. Malachim Rayim, it just seems like a contradiction in terms, not just because of the sort of the fluffy way we see angels, but Malachim are strictly doing the will of God. They have no free choice. They're shluchim. So how? I mean, I don't understand the phrase itself. Seems to me a contradiction in terms.
I'll explain all this on Sunday. It's not a contradiction because no one said these angels are being punished. They didn't. But there are forces, just like you could ask the same question about Klippa. There are Klippas Ruchnim that God created that are not Kedusha. So you could ask the question about all the toxic forces in existence and spiritual that are not created by human beings. When you say Zelu Umazeh Asa Lekim, that God created two realities, one Kedusha and one Le'umazeh, Sitra Achra, the other side, you could ask the same question. God created, how could it be the other side? So that we're going to discuss how that happens. That's part of this whole discussion, how it evolves. But the fact of the matter is, in Shtalshlus, there are positive forces and there are negative forces. And those are the root of all the positive and negative things that happen in this world. We're not talking about human now, human sin and human crimes. We're talking now about in Ruchnius, there are going to be levels that are positive energies and negative energies in the worlds. Not Natsilis, because Natsilis there's no negative. But in Bria Tzir Asir, it begins to evolve. So we'll discuss it more. I'll explain it more. But there are definitely forces like that. You can call them messengers. There's no problem calling them a messenger of God, but they're a messenger that manifests itself as something negative.
So far as we've read here, this is derived from the Chisonius Gemara.
There's Malachi Elyon from Rabbi Reuven Margolius, where he talks about the positive and negative angels. He brings them all. Now you have stories like Ashmedai in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. You have actually negative angels like Bilam. Bilam was a divine prophet, right? He was divine. He was a true prophet. He wasn't a charlatan, and yet he hated the Jewish people, and he would do anything possible to curse them. So how does that exist? Is he a prophet of God? How could he do that? So it's true, he couldn't say anything God didn't want him to say, but he definitely did plenty of damage. So the same thing, you have forces like Pareh himself. He's called Tanin HaGadol. You have forces of Klippa that exist in this world that God sent. So you could ask how that works, and we'll discuss that. But the fact is, especially in the book of Iyov, B'nai Elikim, they actually stand up and they challenge God. So there's Mekatrigim, there's Kitregim Lamaila, Gzeris, and decrees above that come in negative forms. How that works is what we're going to learn, how that actually works. But those forces definitely exist.
You promised us a good ending.
The good ending is that we have the power to transform them all, not just to overcome them, but to transform them all into Kedusha, into holiness. That's the positive ending.
Nice.
It's like you said.
He's entering now into the darkest situations. You know, when a person like Iyov, you said, when a person suffers, and sometimes it's not even due to anything that they did, there are forces that are causing that suffering. So how do we redeem that? So ultimately, the goal here is going to be that we can transform even that, not just bring Kedusha into a dark world, but transform the darkness itself. That's going to be the ultimate happy ending.
Simon, this is like you said, we're not talking about the punishment of these angels, but we're talking about what they are representing. They're doing what Hashem wants. They are representing the evil, the real evil, not about punishment. If the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, in the name of the Zohar, that the Yetzer Hara does not want us to listen to him. He will get a bigger reward, but not listen to him, like Mashal Azayna and Ben Amelach. But
Right.
what they are doing, they are the epidemic of evil. By human being, they have bchira. They don't have bchira.
Correct. Well, we'll talk. It's a whole subject. This is a whole subject of Chassidus that talks a lot about it. Even Malachim, there's even a place where it says that the Malachim do get punished, the negative ones. And there's material on this. I'll explain it as we learn, as we continue learning.
There is the expression Shoichatoi leYetzer Hara, V'osid Lovoi. Maybe Shoichatoi means transforming. I don't know.
Well, it says it'll become Shamish. The Nochash will become a Shamish Gadol.
Yeah.
The Gemara says. Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. Top of